Good evening, punters, and welcome to another episode of The Tripod, where we break down every NRL game every week from a punting perspective. This week we'll be recapping round 7 and another pretty good round from us, going 13-8 on best bets. Obviously not as good as last week, but every week can definitely not be as good as last week. But still, 13-8, a very good round and some very exciting footy. Jacob, how are you going, mate?
Pretty good, thanks, mate. I'm in a corner of my house. It's actually quite cold, so maybe we can get a wriggle on, get this a bit short and sharp. But of course, we'll face the music for our losing bets, and we'll talk about how we won and what we learnt in round 7.
Indeed, we will. Let's start off with the game that we just saw. It was the Tigers demolishing the Bulldogs 34 points to 6. We did not have a best bet on this game. Had a slight lean to the Bulldogs, but the line was just dropping, and it ended up closing 3.5 points, and I think it opened earlier on in the week at about 6.5. But impressive performance by the Tigers, and once again, another one of those performances by the Bulldogs where they just couldn't get enough going in attack. I mean, that first kick from 4, and great, for that first try that the Bulldogs laid on, that was really good, and I did like... I always give the Bulldogs shit about not being imaginative enough. And in the first half, I've got to hand it to them. They were spreading the ball early and often, but just kind of talent devoid in terms of playmakers on that Bulldogs team. But in terms of the Tigers, an impressive performance. And I'll tell you what, those Tigers wingers, Talau, Nofaluma, dead set, epic finishing. And that can sometimes, I know it didn't happen in this game, but that can sometimes be, the difference between winning and losing games. And they've got, a solid thing going there at the moment.
Beast wingers and Katoa in the earlier game today as well is just the absolute master at those finishes where you shouldn't be able to. Speaking of playmakers for the Bulldogs, I watched today thinking the same, it's time to let Averillo play in the halves because he's got that spark, he's got that speed. Maybe he can play in there with Foran. I know he got HIA, but they were very flat today. Obviously losing Hopewadi 5 minutes in was a killer too. But Madge for the Tigers really made an emphasis, We won and we won well last week, but we have to back it up. This footy club wants to, be a team that makes finals. You've got to put in repeat good performances. I mentioned on the pod on Wednesday they hadn't really had an 80-minute performance all year. This would probably be their best one so far. Just comprehensive. They didn't give the Dogs anything easy. And I don't want to repeat myself over and over, but I don't think the Tigers are on a lot of Channel 9 games. Harry Grant, who is third in Dally M voting, is better every week. And at this point, he would be my pick for Queensland. And this team, this Tigers team's frisky and they are a very honest side.
Yeah, and I think at this point it has to be Marnie or Grant based on current form for the first 5 rounds of this season. Let's move on to Thursday night's game. It was the Panthers beating the Rabbitohs 20 points to 12. We did have 4 best bets on the game, unfortunately go 1 and 3. Look, it was just way too many errors from the Rabbitohs, especially in the first half, and it was honestly one of the more frustrating games that I've watched, especially punter. I know a lot of punters that were on the Rabbits, obviously, said that it was a pretty frustrating game. I mean, Latrell, a number of errors. He was not at his best. In fact, he was at his worst in this game, and of course, it's the game that we love the Rabbits in. Not much good to take out from the Rabbits. I guess Jaden Sue, I'll shout out Jaden Sue. He's the Rabbits' best by far. Over 100 metres, over 54 post-contact metres. That's solid. But in terms of the Panthers, they didn't play a great game here. It was more that the Rabbits played terribly in this one. Too many errors. In terms of the Panthers, just a solid performance. I mean, if they were up against a team that played better, they would have lost this one, but the Rabbits were just horrible. In terms of injuries coming out of the Panthers, a few from this one. I know that Cleary has that nose thing, and who knows if that's, one of the reasons why he missed a few of those conversions, because he was a little bit off with the conversions in this game. It looks pretty grim, but you have Kikau injured, Mansour injured, and Liam Martin injured in this one, so we'll have to see how they go moving forward for the Panthers.
Yeah, this was a classic game that is going to roll around in a season as a punter where you just love a side. You got a good feeling that a team is going to put their best foot forward. And the Rabbitohs, winners by 20 plus last 2 weeks, but easy games. We felt now they were going to play a serious game. They were going to be ready for this one. And we got 4 best bets, and they were all great bets, great lines. I think that all moved by kickoff. In fact, in a lot of places, the Rabbitohs closed as a favourite. Exactly. Mind you, that may not have been all of our insight. Obviously, Mansour was scratched before kickoff, and Cleary, it's not just a nose thing. He had cellulitis, an infection in his face. He was in hospital. I think he needed to get it drained. He couldn't open his eyes. So I don't know, they got Burton and Luai. Could they not have just given him the night off? But he was their best again, and he was the best on the field, I thought, when they beat the Storm. And I'll give the Panthers more credit than what you're saying, because you go back, they played really well against the Eels, even though they lost. We know the Eels are really good. And then they beat the Storm and they were better than them. And our question was whether they could bring it again. And they did. And the Bunnies were useless and their errors were absolutely woeful. So you're right, it was a painful watch. But the Panthers were shutting everything down. The Panthers were flocking in defence pretty well. And I mean, the Rabbitohs made a break, had a 3-on-1 through a forward pass. When they were down 12-6, still in the game, Reynolds couldn't find touch of a kick. But in saying that, they didn't deserve to win, and we're probably lucky to get the second half line winner and go 1-3 in that game.
And then the late Friday game was the Storm demolishing the Warriors, 50 points to 6. We did have a number of best bets on this one, just the two, and we do cash both of them. Pretty easy win for the Storm, and I don't know really what I'm taking out of this from a betting perspective. The Storm were just too good and were clinical in this one. I thought it may be one of those times where they have a letdown and a sandwich spot with the Roosters coming up next week, but they were just too good. And in terms of the Warriors, I know it's probably easy to look at that scoreline and say, with the coach getting fired and, all this sort of distractions going on off the field that they didn't put in. But I thought that they did. They were just outclassed in this one. So moving forward, obviously, next week's going to be a really epic game with this Storm one. But in terms of the Warriors, I don't think they didn't try. So I wouldn't say that they've given up on the season just because they lost by 44 points in this one. I thought the Storm were just too good.
Yeah, it's not often we will take a favourite that's, more than a 12-point favourite. But this one was an overwhelming mismatch to us. And, I don't have many takeaways either when one team gets flogged. I mean, one I would say, Fusatua was scratched with HA before the game. So since the lockdown period, there has not been a single game yet where the Warriors had RTS, Fusatua and Mamalo all in the same game. So, keep that in mind if they get all three on the paddock. We always talk about them being a big three outside backs and basically the best three players on that team. RTS looks visibly anguished with, he's trying his best. He's drawing three defenders and he's throwing beautiful no-look passes and his teammates are dropping them for tries. And the Storm, very comprehensive. Of course, the takeaway, though, is Munster knee injury. It's such a shame that it comes right before the Roosters clash. And I think the Munster is their best player. But beyond that, I guess that they've got different halves combinations they can experiment with, but that will hurt them for the next few weeks.
Well, yeah, a few injuries this week, actually. Next up, we've got the Roosters beating the Dragons 26 points to 12. We just had the one best bet on this one, the Roosters plus 8.5. That one does cash. Probably should have the Dragons plus 8.5. That one does cash. In retrospect, we probably should have had a few more bets on this one, but unfortunately, as soon as Teddy and Josh Morris got scratched, this line dropped to 15.5. We just couldn't quite find the value, but this is a similar-ish sort of game where we thought the Roosters might not be completely up for this one, but I thought that they were, even though they were a little bit short-handed, but I thought that the Dragons were solid. I mean, it's easy to get down 10-0 against a Roosters side and fold, but like I said last week, I think the Dragons have finally found the proper roster construction moving forward, and I think that they will be better for that. In terms of the Roosters, lose Radley and Verrills to what could be season-ending injuries. That's bad news for this Roosters side. But props to the Dragons, very solid. And look, I know that the Dragons were terrible to start the season, but judging by the last few games, I know they lost this one. It is a team that I am still going to want to bet on moving forward.
Yeah, so they lost by 14. We cashed our plus 18.5, and it depends how you look at this game. It was an interesting one. So you mentioned before kickoff, Teddy and J-Moz didn't play, and part of our handicap on Wednesday of taking the points of the Dragons was we thought it was highly likely Teddy would be held out of this one. There was no need to play him. And then you mentioned not could be, but it will be season-ending injuries. Firstly, Radley, who's really important to them, and then Verrills, which is pretty tragic. Young up-and-coming player, especially Radley, was going to have a career season. Great. And it's just a reminder as well how hard it is to win the premiership, especially back-to-back, let alone to go for a three-peat when, it's a brutal sport and a cruel sport at times. And people will say those injuries directly led to the Dragons getting back in the game. I mean, it was 10-0 Dragons, scored back-to-back tries, both laid on by Dufty, 10-all at halftime. Funny, because you put in our group a value pick of Dragons to be leading halftime, full-time, paying 13-1. People were losing their minds of how stupid it was. And then the Dragons were on the attack, the final play of the half. Yeah, shaping to kick a field goal and dropped it in the play of the ball. But anyway, 10-all, and the Dragons took a second-half lead. They were up 12-10, so you didn't really have to sweat our plus 18.5. In fact, it was in question who was going to win the game, but the Roosters didn't concede a try in the second half. Again, you had like Ben Hunt couldn't find touch off a penalty. You can't make those kind of mistakes against the Roosters. And the Roosters' class prevailed ultimately, but those injuries will hurt.
Hey, well, let's move on to the Cowboys beating the Knights 32 points to 20 in what was a surprising result for some. We have 4 best bets in the game. We actually liked the Cowboys in this one. I'm kind of unlucky to go 2-2, but we played the early play on the Knights -1, and obviously that one doesn't win, but came back on the Cows pretty hard in this one, and they really did turn up. I thought they were really impressive. I mean, Jason Taumalolo back to his best, nearly 300 metres in this one, but I know you always say, Jacob, the other forwards need to put in. I thought Cohen Hess in particular and Josh Maguire. Josh Maguire whammed back the clock in this one. I thought he was great, and I think the Cowboys didn't only match. I thought they beat up on the Knights forwards. In terms of the Knights, pretty dismal performance in this one, and I know the Knights have been pretty solid this year, and we have made some money betting on them. And I won't, hold this against the Knights too much. I understand, I heard the coach say 9-day turnaround. He gave them a couple of days rest, and he thinks they may have not quite been up for this one. And that's exactly how it looked for me. It wasn't like, they were just a bad team. They just didn't look up for this game. I thought they overlooked the Cows. So, look, I'm not thinking that the Knights will play like this next week. I would expect a bounce back from them.
Yeah, now let me address the early play on the Knights and the fact we were 2-2, because we do confuse people. Anytime that we bet on 2 different sides in the same game, people they think it's like, oh, now you can say you won no matter which side you picked or whatever. Right. But every bet in its own right, we will take it if we think it's value. So if you go back to our round 6 pod, we were just looking for best bets. We were like, oh, the Knights are going to be too good for the Broncos, and we liked the Tigers against Cowboys. And we didn't like the trends they were trending in opposite directions, those 2 teams.
Yes.
And we're saying, what? The Knights are only a -1 favourite next week. That'd be worth playing. And as you know, that line climbed as high as 8.5. It was 8 on kickoff, and that's even once they lost Bradman Best and with McLean named in. So that's a great bet. It doesn't even matter if you hated the Knights. You're beating the line by 7 points. But, if we didn't want to confuse people, we could have just said, well, we've already got one play on the game. Let's just hope the Knights win. -1 is great. But we said, this line's too high on the Cowboys. The Cowboys are the value after getting embarrassed against the Tigers. We actually need to play the Cowboys. So we did. In its own right, they were value plays. We took 3 best bets on the Cowboys. And the only reason we didn't sweep those is because they got too far ahead in the first half. Speaking of that, they're up 26-0. Remember, they were down 34-0 the week before in the first half. That's a 60-point turnaround. Yep. It was pretty simple to me that they just got the jump on the Knights. They got on top of them. We talk about when you have possession deficit that it's really hard to get back in a game. Another thing that strikes me is Robson at hooker just adds speed to this team, as does the Hammer at fullback.
Yep.
And the Cowboys have looked slow to me the last couple of years, so adding a bit of speed to this side helps. But also, I agree, I would not take too much away from the Knights. We know they're a better team than how they played on the weekend.
Yeah, and you're right. We took the early play on the Knights, and as a extreme example, let's say you're talking Roosters Storm next week, and the line's +12 for the Storm. Well, then you're going to take Storm. But if the line's +12 for the Roosters, then you're going to take Roosters. So we always kind of say we will take any team at the right price. Let's move on to the Broncos, losing again to the Titans, 30 points to 12. We have 4 best bets on the Titans. We do win 3 out of those 4, and the only one that we don't win is either team to win 1 to 12, and that's because the Titans won by more than 12, which is a tough one to swallow when you really, really like the underdog, and you think surely they're not going to win by more than 12 if they do win, and in this case,
I swear when we spoke about it, we actually said the Titans could, if Brisbane just falls into a heap, the Titans could win 13 plus, but it still was a good bet just at the odds we gave it out at.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, once again, another really, really bad performance by the Broncos, and I don't know what's wrong over there at Red Hill, but that's 5 games now where they've been absolutely terrible. And now you get Matt Lodge injured. Offengawi's going to be suspended probably for 2 or 3 games. So I really do not know what to do with this Broncos team moving forward. They've had a number of times this year where you think, well, they got to bounce back here. This is the time, the kitchen sink game. And it just seems that they cannot put a solid game together. But it is really tough from a betting perspective in terms of this Broncos team, because, kind of like this game, I guess a lot of people would have wanted to take the Broncos because they'd had so many bad performances, so you're probably going to get some value on them, but they just keep serving up steaming piles of turd. But in terms of the Titans, solid performance from them. I thought Ash Taylor was really good, and to be honest, he's always had that talent, and he just has to put it together on a consistent basis, so hopefully he can for this Titans team moving forward. I just wanted to add something. I know I said in the preview podcast that when you get bad teams like the Titans sitting in last place, you often have to look to bet on that team. You want a little bit of motivation that they can go into that game, because bad teams are not going to get up for every round of the NRL, and certainly an in-state rival like the Broncos is one of those games that you expect a bad team to get up for. So that's one of those things that you can look at moving forward if you are looking to bet on bad teams.
So that's right. The Broncos have lost 5 in a row. Actually, that either team 1-12 bet that we lost, and we obviously won the other 3 easily, was our only losing bet on a Broncos game since the lockdown. So 5 straight weeks, we've gone 11-1 on Broncos games. We've been right every time. And you said 5 shit performances. Don't forget, it actually just reminds you, they should have beat Manly. They were up 18-0 and they had a try disallowed. And when you look back now, if they would have won that game, the pressure would be off a lot more right now. So, because they never really looked like they could win this one. So it hurts even more the ones that they let slip like that week. But the thing about the Broncos, I'll start with them, is what I've realised even in the first couple of weeks of the season, they're front runners. When things are going well, when Payne Haas and David Fafita are barging people over and running for 50 metres or offloading, the team gets confidence. If things are going their way, they play well. But when the acid is on, they crumble. And the reason is leadership, I think. I don't think they have enough good leaders. I'm not talking specifically about Glenn, the captain. I'm just talking about multiple experienced players that when the going is tough, they say, follow me, and they lead by actions. And I talk about the other experienced players like Darius Boyd or Milford. I don't see them doing that. I mean, Lodge does try to lead by example and stuff. Now he's hurt. You even go back to round 1. Why was Brodie Croft and Carrigan named captain? Croft had never played for the club before. And I think Seibold is a great schemer, a great mind of the game, but I don't think he's a great motivator. So you said you don't know what's wrong. I think those are a few things that I, point my finger out of what's wrong with this club. We love getting your guys' feedback. We give you our best bets, and then people, can share their opinion before the game. We appreciate it. We got a lot of feedback that a lot of people weren't going to be jumping on our Titans plays because on surface level, it looked like an obvious desperation all-in spot for the Broncos. But looking a little deeper, we didn't think that the Titans were much inferior to the Broncos, really. And you mentioned the motivation. Imagine this. Imagine you play basketball against your older brother every day and he just bullies you, barges you out of the way, beats you every time. And then one day he seems to be limping a bit. You're going to go easy on him, or you're going to say, this is my chance? And I really feel the Titans could sense the weakness in the Broncos. They took advantage. You're right. Ash Taylor played with confidence and had his best game of the year.
He did indeed. Let's move on to the game of the round. It was the Eels beating the Raiders 25 points to 24. We like the Raiders in this one, and we do the sweep, go 4-4 on plays. But just what an absolutely epic game. And props, to be honest, to the Eels, because we said this might be a letdown for them. They've played numerous really, really tough games in a row, including last week's absolutely brutal one. And they were up for this one. They really were. But so were the Raiders. And, everyone's been heaping shit on the Raiders pretty much since the restart, that they have not been what they were last year. I really worried about them when there was 3 minutes left, I think, in the first half. They butchered that try. And then the Eels go right back up the other end of the field, get a pen, and then you get up 8. And then it's tough to come back.
Cut it to...
that pen cut it to 4.
12-8.
12-8, yeah. So got them to 8, sorry. And then you're kind of like, oh shit, when you're a Raiders team, you haven't been playing that well. You really need that confidence boost. And then what a finish to this one. Eels up 12. And Raiders scored 2 tries down the back end in the last 5 minutes. But just absolutely epic. Gutho ends up winning it for them. But I wanted to just say, Chancellor Clockstead is an absolute superstar. What a fucking game he had. Nearly 200 metres, a couple tries. And that try-saving tackle on Sivo, that was almost a carbon copy of what happened to Teddy when Teddy died. And that, gave them an absolute chance in this one. But just an epic game. Can't really take anything away from either team. But I will say that I know this Parramatta team is completely legit. The Moses injury is obviously bad for them, but they have to have a letdown at some point this year. They're not going to play every game at this intensity.
That's right. Eels, the team that we picked for minor premiership, gave them out 12-1, I think it was. I don't know if bookies are going to honour those. I think a few have voided, haven't they, since the draw changed? And
if they're not voided by now, they're
disappointing. In fact, we also gave out a preseason best bet of the Eels to win over 12.5 games. And keep in mind, that was in a 24-game season. You could get $1.80 on that. They're going to win more than 12.5 in a 20-game season to show you yeah, they definitely voided that one. So to show how good that was. And speaking of the Eels' quality, I would argue that they have played in the match of the round the last 4 weeks in terms of how good it was. So go back to the Manly game, that was a war. Then that Penrith game was quality. Obviously the Roosters game, I know the final score blew out, but that was a hell of a game. And then last night was just everything that you love about rugby league. And the Eels started way stronger. And it was really important that the Raiders started well, but they didn't. The Eels got the first try, and the Raiders were very lucky to not be down 2 or 3 tries. There was a couple of very marginal video ref calls that kept the Raiders in the game, and then they ended up getting not just 6-all, but they got a 12-6 lead off a pretty clear forward pass try as well. So definitely like the things went in their favour in that first half. And you're right, they actually went through again. And Dylan Brown try-saving intercept, because it would have been 18-6 and Moses was injured at that point. Raiders would have probably just rolled on, to be honest. But Dylan Brown saves the try, keeps them in the game. And then, as I mentioned, Moses was injured. The Raiders were up 6. They have to win the game. Just like last week when they're playing Manly, missing 3 backs, including Turbo. Like, you just have to go on with it and win it. And Raiders of last year would have. But all credit to Parramatta, because the way they played coming out into the second half, 10 straight completed sets, they scored 18 straight points, if you include the 2 at the back end of the first half. They were phenomenal without, their key playmaker. And it's funny because with like 5 minutes to go, I had a family member who'd put a multi on that I'd advised him, and it was paying basically $1,000, and he needed the Raiders to win. And I said with like 5 minutes to go, be interesting to see what the cash out is on your multi, because it's not looking good. And the cash out was $1.99. So to win $1,000, he could get $2. I said, they're going to give you $2. I said, that's like saying that the Raiders are a 1 in 500 chance to win from here. I said, we won't cash that one out. We'll just see. And isn't it crazy? Because they did score, and then the cash out was $30 or something. I said, no, not cashing out now. And they scored again. And you mentioned Nickel Kloss, that amazing game. And he was half injured the whole game. He was on the treadmill to score that try to level up. And you get all the way back to Golden Point. But again, credit to the Eels. They hold their nerve, and they win the game. King Gutho shows why he's the king. Hell of a game, and a tough one to swallow for the Raiders. Come all the way back, but fall short.
Indeed, and let's move on to the early game today. It was the Sharks beating the Seagulls 40 points to 22. We did have 2 late best bets we released today. Unfortunately, we go down with the Seagulls. And to be honest with you, we probably shouldn't have made these bets. But what are you going to do? Like we mentioned on Wednesday's pod, didn't really love a side in this one. And maybe we made the mistake that punters sometimes do and just have a best bet because there's a game on. But we did have good lines on this one that weren't available anywhere else. But the Sharks were just too good. And look, the Sharks are one of those teams when they are on, they can roll. And they did that in this one, putting up 40 spot. But what I will say about the Sharkies is, Sean Johnson has been pretty inconsistent basically his whole playing career. But last few games, I thought he's been really impressive and just making smart decisions on fifth tackle options and stuff like that. I think it's really helping the Sharkies, and they're obviously getting healthier every week. Now, the Seagulls, everyone's going to blame it on, missing Tommy Turbo mainly, but Dylan Walker. And, to an extent it was. And I think, you can't, I guess it's hard to fairly rate what Turbo means to this team. He has a hand in so many tries and all that kind of stuff. But I thought that Daly Cherry Evans was pretty poor today. Maybe he was trying to do too much without the influence of Turbo, but some bad decisions on fifth tackle and just a little bit sloppy. So the Seagulls will be better. And, sometimes when you get that injured player theory, they bounce the next game. And just perhaps it wasn't this one. It was actually last week that they bounced. So, look, the Seagulls are going to struggle without those guys. But, not necessarily that's the entire reason they lost today. The Sharks were pretty solid.
Let me rewind to the cracker last night, Eels Raiders. It's worth talking about more because I had one other point.
Go.
We talked about how Parra can win the title this year, and a lot of people said, Parra always falls short. But one of the other reasons we picked him, they signed Campbell Gillard and Madison, and I think they both had their best game for the club last night. They were both phenomenal. Now, the game today, I take the blame because I twisted your arm saying, let's take Manly. So, what changed from Wednesday? Well, for one, the line was more like a 4 when we discussed it on Wednesday, but by today you could get -2. I felt that shifted the value to Manly, but what I have to understand is you've got to respect the line move. If we give out a best bet and the line moves 2 points, later in the week, we're saying, well, it proves it was a great bet because look what the line is now, like smart money is behind that.
Right.
So you can't get ahead of yourself or think that you're, a genius and that you can just pick every game, like that, or you got a crystal ball. Like if a game moves 2 points against the way you're thinking, then maybe there's a reason for that. It doesn't all of a sudden make the side that you like an even better bet. I thought that Manly's forwards would be too good. You mentioned that the teams have similar level rosters, and I thought a guy like Des Hasler is a better coach than Johnny Morris. I think Manly just thought they could come and out-tough the Sharks. So credit to the Sharks because that's not what happened, and it was 6-6 after half an hour. The Sharks were prepared to get into a grind with Manly, and after they were able to get through that initial period, then their class could prevail. I want to give a lot of credit to Cronulla. You lost Cherry. Bronson Cherry, obviously the scandal. Dugan in the offseason was trying to get medically retired. J-Moz wanted out, and he's playing amazing at the Roosters. Mulitalo's injured. Moylan's been in and out with the hammy. Fafita finally came back and is clearly, and even again today, is clearly just a shell of himself. Right. They're talking about replacing Johnny Morris, and they had only won one of their first 5 games, including losing to the Dragons. This team had plenty of reasons to quit, but they got a tough win last week against the Dogs, and they played really well today. So, you've got to credit the resolve of Cronulla, and that's what this result was about. It was about a great performance by Cronulla and Manly not being able to go with the Sharks once they got up, 2 or 3 tries.
And sometimes that's all you need is a close win over a bad team like the Dogs just to get that confidence up. Look, that's going to do it for the round recap for round 7, guys. Hopefully you did get on the best bets this week. 13-8 is still a very good round. So we've been actually absolutely crushing it this year. So make sure you tune in next Wednesday. We'll be breaking down round 8 once again. Looks like a cracking round. And we'll catch you then. Thanks for tuning in.
Lego.